Welcome to the Paris Peace Forum. I am Vanessa SCHERRER, the Vice President of International Affairs of Sciences Po, University of Social Sciences in France, and I'm truly honored to be moderating this important panel discussion today on rethinking education in a post-COVID-19 era. The COVID pandemic has indeed placed education systems in an unprecedented situation all over the world and at all levels, from primary education to higher education. At its peak earlier this year, figures from UNESCO indicate that schools were closed in 190 countries, affecting 1.5 billion students, that is 90% of the global student body. With almost no warning, schools and universities, governments, and private institutions had to switch from presential to distance learning, whether online, through TV or radio broadcasts, or take-home packages. This was an earthquake for the education sector, for the teachers, for the pupils, for their families, for global exchanges and mobilities. Also, and this will be central to our discussion today, the very educational model was transformed. So was the relationship between technology and learning. This challenge has also brought opportunities. It has accelerated innovation, cooperation, and partnerships worldwide. But these changes have also exposed and reinforced deep inequalities in access to infrastructure and educational tools, as well as data system vulnerabilities. These are the questions we will explore during this session, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to our panel of 4 very esteemed speakers. Our first panelist is Her Excellency Kersti KALJULAID, the President of Republic of Estonia. Welcome. We will also have with us Commissioner Maria Gabriel, the Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth at the European Commission. We will also be joined by Ms. Stefania GIANNINI, the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO. And finally, our colleague Asif Saleh, the Executive Director of BRAC, Bangladesh. And I would like to take this opportunity to mention that the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative by BRAC was a scale-up project of the Paris Peace Forum last year. Now let's start our interactive panel. We will have 60 minutes. I will have to be the master of the clock, and I'd like you to apologize. I'd like to apologize in advance for this. And I'd like to ask our esteemed panelists to remain short in the hope to take Q&A from the audience at the end of our session for some 15 minutes or so. If the panelists are fine with that, I'd like to ask a first question to President KALJULAID. Your country, Estonia, has taken extraordinary measures during this period. In particular, you have declared internet access as a human right, and you have been at the vanguard of universalizing connectivity. Would you please tell us from the lessons learned as well as the challenges?
Indeed. In Estonia, this all happened about 20 years ago. We realized that technologies are here to stay, and we started to make use of these technologies for offering public services in this country. We tried to bring together private and public actors in order to make our digital transformation inclusive. And for that, remember, we are talking all the time 20 years ago, computers were not at home. They were rather in village libraries, they were in schools. Indeed, we declared that the state will provide the citizens with internet access. And so we did, not at home, but in public internet access points. This was necessary because Estonia is a country which is not densely populated, and to reach out with the services to each and every citizen, new technologies gave us an opportunity. If I come closer to the education now, then indeed, in Estonian schools, parents, teachers, and children are all connected via internet platforms. There are actually 2 competitive ones. Schools can choose The government supports both. That means that all our parents can check online what their children are doing at school, what marks they are getting, what the teachers think about their progress, also their behavior. Both parents and teachers can gather in the system, discuss and analyze what they think needs to be discussed and analyzed about the school. And also, of course, homework is given via e-school system. This has been there long before the COVID pandemics. But of course, most children in Estonian school system still go to school and went to school in order to receive tuition. There is one school on one small island in Baltic Sea, which has been open also for the students all around the world. It acts as a tiny village school and at the same time a global Estonian school. Similarly, our Ministry of Education has offered a wide range of teaching materials online in order that the parents who take advantage of, for example, the European free labour market and work elsewhere than Estonia can keep teaching their children necessary terminology to turn back into Estonian language teaching one day, if they so wish. This made us somewhat prepared, but of course the volume of homeschooling during the pandemic radically shifted upwards. And of course, we realized more and more that technology is just one element of new school. The other side is and will always be how to keep our children learning how to be compassionate human beings, the members of our society. We should not, when we discuss technology and schools, focus on technology. Children learn technology all by themselves nowadays, naturally, like we learned our social skills naturally. We need to concentrate on giving them social skills. This was also most pronouncedly shown by the coronavirus crisis here in Estonia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may, I will follow up on what you just said to ask a question to Commissioner Maria Gabriel. As a continuity to what was just said to President KALJULAID, how is the EU stepping up cooperation to support that digital transition in terms of inclusion, equity, but also quality and human relationships?
Indéniablement, le mot-clé ici est coopération et coordination, et c'est l'une des grandes leçons que nous avons apprises pendant cette crise. Et c'est pourquoi, avec les ministres de l'Éducation, depuis le mois de mars, nous avons établi une plateforme commune où il était extrêmement important pour les États membres d'échanger de bonnes pratiques, de voir quels sont les moyens dont ils disposent au niveau européen, de pouvoir les utiliser dans leur propre pays, mais aussi de continuer à utiliser cette plateforme pour se rendre compte que l'investissement dans l'éducation numérique est un investissement stratégique. C'est pourquoi je pense qu'il est nécessaire de voir quelles étaient les opportunités, mais aussi les leçons apprises, les faiblesses pendant la crise. Nous avons vu que nous avons besoin de coordonner, de coopérer ensemble pour s'attaquer à des problèmes de connectivité, d'équipement, de formation pour les enseignants. Nous avons en même temps une extraordinaire capacité de mobilisation, de créativité que les enseignants, les institutions de l'éducation, les élèves, les étudiants nous ont montré. Donc, ce qui est important, c'est de trouver cet équilibre entre faiblesse et force, de se rendre compte que le numérique permet d'être plus inclusif, mais il comporte aussi des risques de reproduire des fractures. Et c'est pour cela, je pense que le premier message pour nos États membres, afin de renforcer cette coopération, c'est vraiment d'avoir des investissements à la hauteur des enjeux. Dans les prochains mois, ils vont soumettre leur stratégie nationale pour le Recovery and Resilience Facility. Il est important que l'éducation numérique, l'éducation en général, soit dedans comme un investissement stratégique. La même chose, assurer des synergies avec tous les autres fonds structurels. Le deuxième point, continuer à travailler sur la connectivité dans les zones rurales, dans les zones éloignées, pour permettre à des personnes vulnérables d'accéder à l'éducation. Et c'est pourquoi que dans notre plan d'action de l'éducation numérique, nous allons avoir une nouvelle initiative, Connectivity for Schools, qui adressera ce problème dans les zones rurales et les zones éloignées. Troisième élément important, le rôle des enseignants. Nous avons vu que la moitié de nos enseignants ont été confrontés pour la première fois avec ces nouvelles technologies, que les élèves demandent à ce que les enseignants leur proposent des technologies nouvelles plus interactives, encore plus pertinentes, plus individualisées. Donc c'est pourquoi je me réjouis de nouveau que dans l'espace européen de l'éducation que nous avons proposé, nous allons créer 25 académies des enseignants européennes où l'accent sera mis sur la formation des enseignants, sur l'échange de bonnes pratiques et leur donner la possibilité d'élaborer ensemble de matériel pédagogique qui pourra être utilisé. Quatrième élément, coopération via une nouvelle proposition, c'est d'établir un centre européen de l'éducation numérique pour justement promouvoir la collaboration et avoir des échanges structurés. Nous voulons avoir un endroit, un guichet unique, un endroit qui sera une référence pour tous, où les États membres vont élaborer des cadres communs, vont voir quels sont les moyens à leur disposition et aller plus loin. Enfin, dernier point, en ce qui me concerne, je suis commissaire à l'éducation, mais je suis aussi commissaire à la recherche et l'innovation. Et il nous faut de l'innovation pour encore mieux adapter les technologies à l'éducation numérique, pour encore mieux coopérer. C'est pourquoi il est très important d'avoir des synergies entre l'espace européen de la recherche qui a au cœur l'excellence, mais qui a maintenant une nouvelle ambition de permettre l'accès à l'excellence, donc l'inclusion de nouveau, et l'espace européen de l'éducation. L'exemple, c'est l'initiative de nos universités européennes, 41 alliances, 280 universités qui travaillent déjà ensemble. 60% ont déjà commencé à mutualiser leur matériel pédagogique, d'avoir de l'interopérabilité, d'élaborer ensemble des logiciels. Et 85% de nos universités européennes disent que si cette initiative avait commencé un an auparavant, il aurait été mieux préparé. Donc je pense que maintenant, il va falloir vraiment se donner les investissements nécessaires, initiatives concrètes pour permettre aux plus vulnérables, les zones rurales, d'être inclus et en même temps d'adresser des questions de synergie pour pouvoir maximiser l'impact.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for mentioning also the spirit of the European University Alliances, of which Sciences Po is an active part. I'd like to suggest that we move to the global level with Madame Giannini. We have touched upon that already, but from a global perspective, from the UNESCO perspective, of course, the crisis has amplified inequalities, but also brought opportunities, as was just mentioned, and new priorities as well. We have heard about your great global education coalition. Would you please tell us a little about this?
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much. It's great pleasure to sit in this virtual room today. And let me say that the top consideration we have today is to protect education and raise it up on every political agenda. That's why this new kind of solidarity partnership we established through the Global Education Coalition, which now counts around 150 partners, is about. And we have to put education at the same level than health and jobs. And thanks to the Paris Forum for giving space and voice to education today. Well, let me quote a bit, if I may, just to start a bit to discuss about this topic. Some critical words from the president of Ethiopia, Madame Saleh Work, could unfortunately not join us as foreseen. She chairs our International Commission on the Futures of Education. And she talked about this topic like this, more or less. This is a serious risk that COVID-19 will wipe out several decades of progress, most notably the progress that has been made in addressing poverty and gender equality. And now it's time for public deliberation, democratic accountability, and intelligent collective action. So it's about that we are experiencing this new kind of partnership around education and for education. And let me say also that despite the very interesting and commendable action of governments around the world, from the north to the south, east, from east to west, this is a real global crisis, and the response has been a global one. This pandemic, from the beginning, has amplified inequalities. This is something UNESCO immediately started to call for. 1/3 of students simply were not able to pursue their schooling through remote learning. And this is where the digital divide hurts. In Africa, only 11% of learners have a household computer and only 15% household internet, compared to the around 50% worldwide. And today, while we are talking at Paris Forum for Peace, we estimate that around 24 million students are at risk of dropping out this year because of the pandemic. So, yes, we have been keeping on the pressure. We are providing guidance to navigate these new realities hand in hand with other UN agencies and also other partners around this coalition. And we are also doing something more. Let me focus on this point, which in my opinion is a very critical one. A few weeks ago, we convened as UNESCO, together with some champions countries, Ghana, Norway, and the UK, a global education meeting. And heads of states and governments, ministers around the table agreed on essential steps that must be taken in the next 12 or 15 months. It's about an action plan. It's about some priorities that are immediately and urgently necessary to put education at the very core of the agenda. Let me mention some of them because interesting. They're almost the same that Commissioner Gabriel mentioned before, and the President of Estonia as well. There are 4 priorities. Reopening schools safely. We see the discussion also in France. It's a very hot topic, let me say it like this. And we know that the longer they stay closed, the higher the risks for students, whether it's academic loss, social-emotional impact, or simply lack of access or nutrition. Next, the recovery means supporting teachers. This is a topic already mentioned today, and we know that teachers are the front runners of this process. Let me put like this, exactly like medical doctors in hospitals somehow. Third is about the skills development. Of course, we have to link more and better than in the past, schooling, teaching, learning, and job, because we know that will be a huge crisis in job market as well. And finally, narrowing the digital divide. The president of Estonia very clearly mentioned the connectivity, let me say, as a new dimension of the right to education. And this is something that the coalition convened and established by UNESCO is very much working and focusing on.
Thank you very much, Stefania. You touched upon so diverse, important issues on which I'm sure we will come again. If I may go on the question of inequalities and turn to Asif Saleh. BRAC has built a global reputation with its model to empower the poorest and the most vulnerable population through education and grassroots community initiatives. We know that this pandemic has hit these groups hardest. It was just mentioned again, and in particular, girls and women. How has your program adapted to support learning continuity for these groups, and what are your recommendations for the coming years?
Thank you, Vanessa. And you're absolutely right. And what our previous speakers told, that the inequality has magnified and marginalized, got even more marginalized during this pandemic. So the damage in education, we fear that it's going to be a long-lasting one and affecting an entire generation unless we do things very proactively. I mean, just to give you an idea about the context in Bangladesh, which is quite different from Estonia and other places, is that this pandemic has disrupted the learning of close to 50 million students in Bangladesh, including 1 million out-of-school children who were enrolled in government's second chance education scheme. And schools have been now closed for almost 7 months. And Bangladesh is very resource constrained. It's about a half of US's population packed into the state of New York. So you can imagine how densely populated it is. And quite a resource-challenged country. So, so the fear is that this entire generation of children may not have access to, the foundational literacy that was needed. And we're looking at a potentially a major dropout of children from schools when the school reopens. And potentially most disproportionately girls would be dropping out and they would be getting married off. I mean, that's the worry that we have. So, and more importantly, across the board, I mean, we're looking at a major learning loss among the students from low income and marginalized communities. So a number of things have been tried from the government side, and we also work with the government. I mean, one key thing has been that a parliamentary TV channel was very quickly converted into provide a long distance education channel. BRAC also provided content there. You know, the urban middle class schools mostly benefited from the online education provided by various schools, but our focus has always been those who have been out of the system, and they suffered, right? And then from our studies, we saw that about 57% had access to television, 40% had access to the internet, but not necessarily could pay for it. And so children in low income and marginalized communities, due to the lack of access to TV and internet and affordability, has been pretty much left out. So what we tried to do was that how to work within this constraint and pivot. And so we tried a few things. I mean, essentially, we could, of course, our schools could not open, so we had to try remote without internet. And so moving away from the teacher-led model, we tried to focus a bit more on a model where teacher facilitated and parents and the community got more involved with the education. So what does that mean? I mean, the idea is akin to a teacher-facilitated homeschooling method. The teacher's role became limited to guiding and checking up on the phone and doing the assessment. She would have about 20 minutes of conversations using feature phones with each student twice or thrice a week and give assignments and work with the parents on delivering it. And similarly, medium-wise, we didn't use smartphones and stuff, so we opted for things like community radio, which can be accessed by phone, the regular feature phone, and feature phones and use their conference call features. So internet and smartphones continue to be a luxury for the masses, particularly during such economic crisis. So radio was a good available medium for the remotest part of the country. So we have used this platform to provide pre-primary education. We have piloted a radio school, which runs a 25-minute session twice a week by a BRAC teacher, and the assessment is done with the parents. So about 51,000 students got some sort of learning through this. The other concept we started piloting is the notion of forming smaller groups with students who live close to each other. It's simple, but they are quite novel in those settings that I mentioned, and that need to be facilitated. So again, these children learning groups, what we call CLGs, were established with the members who live in close proximity and with limited supervision from teachers, and focusing on clustered learning and more involvement from the community in ensuring that they are actually learning through this process. So we also brought necessary changes into the curriculum, adding modules on well-being, hygiene, learning engagement, and others. And in a typical BRAC homeschool, a teacher connects with kind of these learning groups of 4 students and their parents through twice weekly group calls. Calls last for about 15 to 20 minutes, and during which a student's performance is assessed. So as we transition into this new normal, we are basically more and more looking at bringing in technology, but not necessarily at the delivery phase because the resource constraint is there, but looking at a more administration phase, that how we can use technology to better assess learning outcomes. So tab-based learning and monitoring, a number of these other things. And we have a very interesting learnings from some of these, which I can elaborate in a later time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asif. I'd like to go back to President KALJULAID, if I may, and to examine a little more what you told us in your first remarks regarding a public policy perspective, because as you mentioned, you do have a very long-term experience now. Based on that, what can you say about the specific role of technology and how and the role it plays in strengthening education systems of a given country, whether in terms of access, learning, and teaching? So, what is your experience with this and the suggestions you may have?
Thank you. First, I would like to say that I would really like Estonian people to realize how lucky they are listening to other people speaking here. We are completely literate for more than a century. Girls have never been discriminated in education system below the tertiary level. Our education is totally free, even university is free. And the main problem we had to grapple during the virus crisis was that in some households there were not enough computers and tablets for children. So NGOs helped with that, so we overcame that as well. The lessons we learned, first and most important lesson probably we learned was that we should be less timid, more courageous in working further with our very egalitarian school system. Our school system is egalitarian, it's on top of PISA tests because of that as well. But we do lack teachers in rural areas, and we see that with the depopulation of rural areas and gathering people into the towns, the schools there lack both students, but also, of course, teachers. So with this virus crisis, it was demonstrated, and we as a society should feel encouraged now to, for example, organize that the best physics or chemistry teachers in best schools of Estonia can actually open their lessons to students to learn who are from different schools, hundreds of kilometers away. It probably will take a teaching coordinator locally who would then verify that the students really understood, verify also their homework, and be kind of assistant teacher to the main teacher. But the access to the best lessons given in the country can be open to people who are elsewhere, which will help us to keep our egalitarian school system. It takes from us close to 7% of our GDP. We cannot spend more, so we need to use more technology to achieve this. Second, which has been obvious, but will probably be pushed also by this virus crisis, is that when we went to school, then it was clear that if you were 9 or 10 years old, what you knew was more or less function of your age. For nowadays, this is the function of the children's interest, their access to internet, and their age, and less the age, which means that studying, be it in school or distant learning, will be less that the teacher stands in front of the classroom teaching students. Rather, children will more independently learn, and going to school, they feel supported in their learning activities. For that, you need to use technology because, well, children would have to have access to various levels of subject matter at the hand. And the teacher will then make sure that everybody benefits from these tools which they have, measures correctly the level of their knowledge, gets feedback from the system, but they don't need to do all the same exercise in the class because children can be very different in what they know nowadays in various subjects, geography, math, language skills. We all know this and we are slow to adapt. I believe that this crisis has demonstrated how adept our kids are at supported learning nowadays, or independently teaching themselves using materials. We should feel encouraged and radically change our school in this way to be sure that each and every child learns something interesting at the school. And with this comes this third element. If there is so much technology at the school, and we also know that outside the school, for example, if you go to the shops or you take a plane, you don't interact anymore with other people. In the schools, if we now rely more on technology as well, this means, yet again, less interaction with people. And therefore, right from the kindergarten age, we need to really expand the social skills of our children, put a specific, huge emphasis on social skills, how to be a compassionate human being, how to be assertive, but not to be offending. All this which we learn naturally in our societies by low-level, short, low-risk interactions like buying an ice cream, taking a bus. We had to buy the ticket, we had to hand over the money. Nowadays, you have automatized all these interactions, so it's human to machine rather than human to human. So the children have less and less opportunities to have these low-risk, short interactions, and they don't learn by themselves. Contrary to us, they learn by themselves technology, not the social skills. For us, it was vice versa. So counterintuitively, when we have more technology in our schools, we need to put great emphasis on social skills. That's what we have learned.
Thank you very much for the second time in our panel, and rightly so, you insist on the fact that any progress on technology should not lessen our attention to developing and even expanding in the context social skills, and I think that's a very, very important point. Also, rightfully, you mentioned early on the chance of your people, given the advancement of the country that your country has made. And so I'll turn to Commissioner Maria Gabriel after the comments of a proud member state, and as should be. How can education be protected as a common public good, the way we heard the President mention it, and also how education can actually help rebuild societies and prepare future generations to become actors of change, and including for a future global shocks regarding health, but also other global challenges like climate change, for instance.
Bon, l'éducation est au cœur de tout cela. Cela veut dire qu'il nous faut une véritable approche holistique où on ne regarde pas chacun dans son coin, mais qu'il y a une véritable coopération au niveau international, au niveau européen. Et c'est pour cela que je me réjouis que dans l'espace européen de l'éducation que nous avons proposé de réaliser d'ici 2025, les mots-clés sont l'inclusion, la qualité, l'égalité des sexes, les transitions vertes et écologiques, le rôle des enseignants, mais aussi le rôle des universités. Et quand on parle d'assurer l'égalité d'accès à l'éducation, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, véritablement, nous avons des systèmes d'éducation qui sont confrontés à un triple défi. D'abord, donner à tous les jeunes la possibilité de développer leurs compétences clés en mettant l'accent sur les compétences de base, la lecture, les mathématiques, les sciences, ainsi que les compétences numériques. Or, aujourd'hui, un jeune Européen sur 5 manque encore de compétences adéquates en lecture, en mathématiques ou en sciences. Deuxième, nous devons réduire au minimum les risques de décrochage scolaire. Et le troisième, nous devons aussi assurer le bien-être des élèves de l'école. La présidente vient de si bien le dire, où c'est dans l'école que les élèves développent un bon nombre de compétences sociales et émotionnelles qu'il leur faut ensuite pour la vie. Donc aujourd'hui, nous devons le dire qu'il y a certains chiffres auxquels il faut s'attaquer en Europe. J'ai mentionné un jeune sur 5 sur les compétences de base, mais nous avons environ 10% de jeunes qui quittent prématurément l'école. De plus, le sentiment d'appartenance des élèves à l'école est en déclin dans de nombreux pays, tandis que le harcèlement, y compris le cyberharcèlement et la violence sont en augmentation, avec plus d'un élève sur 5 étant victime du harcèlement au moins quelques fois par mois. Et c'est pour cela que nous proposons une nouvelle initiative, Pathways for School Success, qui va justement prendre en considération qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire dès le primaire, ensemble avec les États membres, pour augmenter et maximiser les chances de nos jeunes. L'autre, dans le supérieur, c'est l'initiative avec les universités européennes, parce que ce que je voudrais avec cette initiative, c'est que nos alliances offrent des parcours plus flexibles, plus diversifiés, pour permettre à des personnes qui peut-être ne pensent pas spontanément à avoir ces études de les rejoindre. Et ici, il me semble qu'il y a 2 points importants. Nous devons travailler à avoir un cadre européen pour les micro-qualifications, pour pouvoir justement diversifier les différents parcours et les personnes qui peuvent voir que l'éducation, c'est au centre de leur future réalisation personnelle et professionnelle. Et nous devons davantage travailler avec les régions. Pour le moment, je ne le vois pas, mais nous sommes en train d'établir un plan d'action avec le comité des régions pour les 2 prochaines années. Pour moi, le niveau régional a un rôle clé. Troisième élément, je voudrais le dire que pour avoir une société plus résiliente, nous ne sommes pas confrontés seulement à une transition numérique, nous faisons face aussi à une transition verte. C'est pour cela, si nous voulons avoir des citoyens qui, dès le plus jeune âge, portent la transition numérique et ne la subissent pas, nous devons inclure toute la communauté autour de l'éducation d'y contribuer. Je me réjouis que nous allons proposer la création d'une coalition pour l'éducation, pour le climat. Nous allons travailler avec les États membres pour avoir une recommandation sur l'éducation pour la durabilité environnementale, parce que je crois que la communauté de l'éducation peut énormément nous aider. d'autant plus que nous avons des défis qui parfois sont très précis et je pense toujours aux bâtiments des écoles, des universités qui ne sont pas encore aux normes énergétiques. Or, 8% en moyenne dans les États membres sont pour ce type de dépenses. Dernier point, nous devons être flexibles, nous devons être innovants. Cela veut dire que nous devons aussi coopérer au niveau international et utiliser les nouvelles technologies là où elles ont une valeur ajoutée pour être plus résilients, mais toujours se souvenir que jamais les machines, les robots, les nouvelles technologies ne vont remplacer l'être humain. Nous devons préserver l'approche où la valeur ajoutée, c'est l'homme aux commandes, c'est nos valeurs et nos principes fondamentaux tels que l'éducation nous les enseigne tous les jours.
Thank you, Commissioner Gabriel. We will. I will ask maybe two last questions to Asif Saleh and Stefania Giannini before we turn to the Q&As with the audience. Maybe Asif first, because again your model is quite outstanding, and so the question of the transferability is interesting for everyone listening to us today. So, according to you, what initiatives has BRAC taken during the current times, but also before that, could be used as an inspiration and transferred or replicated elsewhere? We would love to hear from your key takeaways and suggestions for others.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I think essentially, obviously, we had to kind of build the plane as we were flying because this crisis came in such a sudden way, and that we had to pivot on everything. But I mean, I think one realization that has come in is that, I mean, this is the fact that the pandemic is the edtech's moment. I mean, it appears to be somewhat misplaced in the context of low-income economies, because without the infrastructure, without the training, the right pedagogy capacity, I mean, it doesn't work for everyone. So you're creating more inequity by doing this. But of course, our aspiration should be there that from our learning in this pandemic is that we need to perhaps look at a blended model of both human interaction and a good sort of involvement of technology and perhaps more on administering the overall education infrastructure, like looking at learning outcomes and other things. And that is a key thing. And there needs to be more sort of evidence generated in terms of how it works. We can't also ignore the text for low resource settings. I think I mean, the crisis has made everyone a lot, I would say, had more humility, humbler. So the appetite for bigger change is now there from this experience, which was not perhaps there. So things were happening at a slow pace. So that's the other thing. And we need to also seriously start looking into pedagogy, which is not so teacher-centric. So our experience actually shifting away a little bit and from a completely teacher-centered approach towards an approach where students have more responsibility for their learning, supported by family, peers, and the community, is actually a very good thing. I think people can actually get more involved in their children's education through this process. So this is a good thing which we should not let go, even post-pandemic. And for remote areas, I think, as I was saying, for low tech, which has often been overlooked, I think we can think about that. Like community radios can seriously be considered as they are accessible by basic feature phones. And again, as I was mentioning in my previous question, that this learning of creation of these peer groups, learning through small clusters during crisis to supplement the learning at school, can be a very effective means to reduce learning losses during such crisis, and at the same time learning from each other. And if I look at the broader context among key takeaways, I mean, I think essentially, as I was mentioning, I mean, we're really worried about the school dropouts that's going to happen when the school opens. And schools are really closed. And so adaptability and flexibility to the changing scenario to any model would be essential to reduce this. So we have to work, all of us, I mean, government, NGOs, and others have to work extra hard to bring children, particularly girls, back to school. And so that would require large-scale campaign, door-to-door visits, and particularly to bring students from the marginalized communities. And everybody needs to work collaboratively on this. And the other big takeaway is that there is, and this has been mentioned by others as well, there's huge inequity when it comes to digital infrastructure. I mean, this absolutely has to be prioritized. Affordable, meaningful internet connection is almost a basic human right now, like Estonia has prioritized. And otherwise, I mean, you are creating a big digital divide and magnifying inequity. Digital transformation needs to be fast-tracked, but it has to be thoughtful and effective. So evidence generation in terms of more effective models, what works, what doesn't work in remote areas and stuff, that needs to be very thought through. Very little is known in terms of what works in low resource settings. So more needs to be done here. And last but not the least, I mean, all issues are connected, right? So I think we really need to think about universal basic income and social protection, because as more families are falling below poverty line, more families are prioritizing livelihood over education, and children are dropping out of school. So unless we solve the bigger problem, and as we are getting more used to a steady flow of crises, we need that better safety net and design better coping mechanism for the poor. Just this year in Bangladesh, we not only dealt with the pandemic, but we had a super cyclone. We had one of the longest flood in the last 25 years. So all of that had to be dealt with. And so what the people needs are coping mechanism, and we need to have better targeting mechanism for that. And I think essentially building back better will be possible with balanced investments in capacity, technology, literacy, infrastructure, better assessment methods, and more autonomy in learning for our students in the essentially. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asif, for this strong statement, but also encouragement to everyone with great hope. So the final question to Stefania Giannini from UNESCO, before we switch to the question of the audience, because we have a very active audience today, so of course we are delighted about this. Maybe at this point to momentarily close the panel discussion, do you think that education will ever look the same after that crisis, or has the paradigms definitely shifted? And I'm talking for primary education, secondary education, as well as higher education, as a matter of fact.
No, I don't think education will be the same. Let me say that there has been a big change in public perception towards education in this crisis. And today, while we are talking, in about 20 countries, schools still remain closed. We must not forget that. But in many others, the majority, different arrangements, different solutions, including hybrid learning that was already very much mentioned today, a mix of face and remote learning are being tried out. But the fact that governments are keeping schools open during a second lockdown, a second wave of the crisis, testifies to how much education matters for society, for social cohesion, well-being, and our future. So I feel positive in the sense that there are some takeaways, very positive takeaways we can keep from this crisis, and the challenge now is to carry on these positive takeaways. Let me mention some of them. And it's about the transformation of education and the need that transformation in education can contribute to transform society as well. We have learned that education systems were not prepared for such a shock, this is for sure. But at the same time, we are also learned that they are capable of rapid innovation and flexibility. There is a new kind of agility in school systems, from the preschooling to university level. Our survey of 100 countries found that almost everyone introduced remote learning using online platforms, TV, radio programs, and take-home, to say packages. We have seen teachers really reinventing the system of teaching and moving overnight from traditional classrooms to virtual ones. And you've seen that technology, last but not least, cannot be a substitute for the human factor in education. And that it has to build into teaching and learning increasingly. So I think that the last takeaway, and maybe in this Paris Forum is the most relevant, but absolutely, in my opinion, is the most relevant one, is the so-called existential takeaway. This is the interdependence of our world that previous speakers have already mentioned, that the pandemic definitely has so strongly demonstrated. And certainly we were aware of it before, with climate change and other big challenges which are around us. But this crisis definitely has hit the lives, the well-being, the certainty we have, the future of every community and every country. And it has also revealed very much intolerable inequalities. So education is not a simply transmission of knowledge, we know. But we could see in this crisis that education must really become more and more transmission of values and transmission of a vision of the future. This is what we called within the SDG 4, the Quality Inclusive Education for All goal number 4 in 2030 agenda, education for sustainability, education for global citizenship. And this is very much about giving schools a new, important, unique mission, which is providing a space of taking a collective responsibility together for our common humanity and our shared planet. It's about thinking critically, accepting diversity, cultural diversity, and taking care. If you ask me which is the key word that we can take from this crisis and put in the education system in terms of standards, content, curriculum development, teachers training, and all the technical issues we are daily working on, is taking care of the planet, of ourselves, of human relationship. And I think that as the word crisis says, from ancient Greek, crisis is about a separation, distinction, and taking decision. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to put in practice this shift of paradigm that it's already there.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to all of you for fascinating remarks. And if I may, I'd like to suggest that we now turn to some of the questions that we have received from the audience. I'd like to apologize in advance because I'm not given the names, so I'm only being communicated some questions, and I'll try to summarize them. And I believe many of the questions open to all of our panelists. So I'll maybe list 3 questions that I have received already, and then our panelists can respond. One question seems very interesting to me because it connects to another crisis that is not the COVID crisis, which is let's say, the post-truth crisis. What is the role and how should we insist on the specific status of education in producing evidence-based knowledge in a fake news era? So that is the first question. And that connects with the question of another person in the audience who also asks in French about the ethical dimension of education in a world where the GAFAs, not to mention them, are connecting with education systems. So I believe these 2 questions can come in one issue. There is also at least 2 questions regarding the training of the teachers. This earthquake is also an earthquake for the teachers. It has been touched upon in the discussion today, but since we have 2 questions regarding this, I think it's very important regarding the education ecosystem. And there's another question which I feel is also very interesting, which states typically, and I will read this one, do you know of any current initiatives that are actually reducing the digital divides for the most vulnerable populations of the world living outside of leading economies? So the digital, can you please say more about the digital in enabling to reduce the divide? So that may be a question for Asif, but for many who has already mentioned that, but for many of you. So now I'll give, who would like to start answering some of the questions, keeping in mind that, of course, I believe all of you would like to respond. So I was just told that we could take 3 or 4 minutes longer. So if each of you could respond to these questions in the order you wish, you are free to start and to cherry pick what seems the most interesting to you, given your experience and your position. So who would like to start? Yes, President, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. First of all, post-truth. You have to make sure that you do not have grown-ups in your population who are educated so badly that they are able to believe that the earth is flat, that they are not able to distinguish anonymous information and use it only for fun and correct information. This is the problem of our non-egalitarian school systems in developed nations, which we have allowed to develop in last decades. This has also reduced rapidly the social mobility, which again enhances that people are ready to believe what they never should believe. And third element is that indeed information used to be expensive and it was available for fewer people in the society. The rest of us went to the elections and basically voted whichever way. They were not influenced by the political programs, so their votes scattered. Now, with this cheap information available online, those who are smart enough to gather people who previously scattered their votes across all political spectra can now bias these part of voters to support simple but wrong solutions, and you have nothing but education to fight it. GAFAs and all these, don't blame companies. Anonymity in internet is the lack of digital ID systems, and digital ID is in essence a passport in internet, and giving passports to people is the domain of governments. So if each and everybody had a digital ID, they would only trust the information and act and transact online with the people who also have digital ID, so that people know with whom they are connecting online. Training of teachers. There's nothing specific in training teachers in technology. If technology is all around us, for example, in our case, 99% of our public services is digitalized. So teachers and all other people use constantly and learn constantly. So there is no specific need to train them for other than the teaching technologies online. And this, of course, the universities need to do, and our universities pay great attention to that part as well. And indeed, in the developing world, Estonia is trying to help. Also, we have a memorandum of understanding with African Union to promote standardizing and digital development in Africa. This is what we can do. But concrete systems, I guess my colleagues here on the panel might need know more about them. And since our time is out, I would apologize. I would now leave you all, and thank you for the wonderful discussion.
Thank you very much for your outstanding insights and staying with us so long today. Commissioner Gabriel would like to follow up on the questions and remaining short, and sorry to be again the master of the clock like this.
Rapidement sur les 3 questions, parce que d'abord sur la lutte contre la désinformation, vous savez que c'est un sujet qui me tient à cœur, puisque comme commissaire au numérique, j'ai initié le groupe d'experts qui a commencé à travailler sur ce sujet au niveau européen. C'est pour cela aussi je vais proposer la création d'un groupe d'experts de haut niveau pour voir comment, avec les moyens dont on dispose et par l'éducation, nous pouvons attaquer ce problème. Aujourd'hui, 40% de nos élèves pensent que l'éducation aux médias, la pensée critique critique, la manière de sélectionner, de faire la part des faits et de tout ce qui peut être des théories de manipulation et de complot, considère que ce n'est pas suffisamment fait dans l'école. Deuxième chose, nous devons élaborer des lignes directrices pour l'utilisation de l'intelligence artificielle dans l'éducation. Nous devons avoir des principes éthiques, nous devons avoir à ce moment-là une idée très claire, l'homme aux commandes, transparence et responsabilité du début à la fin. L'intelligence artificielle, les GAFA ne peuvent jamais remplacer le rôle clé de l'école et des enseignants. Le même rôle fondamental pour les enseignants, et c'est pour cela que je pense notamment aux Teachers Academies que nous voulons proposer avec Erasmus+. Nous avons déjà la plateforme e-twinning qui fait un très bon travail. Il faut savoir que quand on parle des formations des enseignants, il y a deux questions qui sont fondamentales pour moi, l'accès à ces formations et la reconnaissance de ces formations. C'est pourquoi nous avons à la fois l'idée d'avoir ces académies des enseignants européennes, mais surtout les micro-qualifications, la reconnaissance de ces cours online massifs, puisqu'aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas de différence entre un enseignant qui les a suivis, qui lui a pris de son temps, et entre quelqu'un d'autre qui ne l'a pas fait. Il va falloir que ceci ait un impact positif sur sa carrière, sur son développement professionnel. Dernière chose, exemple de comment réduire la fracture numérique. L'exemple, c'était notre initiative Wi-Fi for EU que je voudrais appliquer pour le Connectivity for Schools. Qu'est-ce que nous avons fait? Avec 120 millions d'euros, nous avons équipé plus de 9000 municipalités en Europe avec un voucher de 15 000 euros qui leur permet à 10 points de l'espace public d'avoir l'Internet gratuit pour les 3 prochaines années, l'Internet haut débit. Donc, je pense qu'ici, avec Connectivity for Schools, nous devons faire la même chose pour les zones rurales et les zones éloignées.
Thank you very much, Maria. Asif, maybe you want to follow up?
Sure.
And then we'll close with Stefania.
Thank you. I think if there's one thing that keeps me up late at night is this issue. I mean, how we will deal with this crisis of lack of trust and cohesion and peace, and which has been exacerbated many folds because there is no singular version of truth anymore. And thanks to social media, I think, which often their whole business model is built around engaging people and keeping people in their system, as a result, oftentimes they plays on your worst possible instinct. I mean, the Honorable President mentioned that education should be good enough that you should not trust that the earth is flat. But if you are only hearing from people around you that the earth is actually flat, then this is, no matter what kind of education you're going to get, and you're going to believe that. Essentially, social media, from your newsfeed, that's what you're getting. You're just hearing from people who thinks and acts like you, to think that this is the world as we know it, and which will be completely opposite from your neighbor, who has completely different sets of views. So now suddenly we have 2 billion versions of truth based on the feed that is providing by the big tech. So I think first thing is to do is that we really have to, the governments needs to get their act together in figuring out how to regulate this, because the information is not cheap here. Information is actually quite expensive. It's coming from the data that these individual users are providing. So it's actually from a very expensive data, and there needs to be much better control over that. Second is from the perspective of children who's going to get exposed to social media very soon. I mean, I think this is something that we need to build in as part of life skills, that how to deal with this sort of the social digital world, because the questioning things, building a critical analytical mindset, that needs to be part of this good education, and how to navigate this world is also needs to be part of that education. So this is, I think, has become so important, because every single country we see that there are social unrest happening because it's people are guided by the worst possible instinct, and misogyny, sort of racism, everything has been played up, division has been played up. So we really need to get our act together in this. And in the second question, essentially, I don't know of much intervention in terms of digital infrastructure, honestly speaking. has not been prioritized. It has been left up with the state mostly. And oftentimes this has been very slow in terms of implementation of affordable quality internet, dominated by private sector, which often again looks from a business model perspective and not from an equity perspective. So I think this also needs to be sort of revisited, as I was saying, that internet, affordable, meaningful internet has to be a basic human right going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif, for your engagement again. Stefania, Ms. Jen, would you like to close and responding to the questions we were asked?
Yes. I have an easy task somehow because, you know, previous speakers, Commissioner and Honorable President and Safi already said some of the points I would like to underline. So to summarize, I think that education can really give the GPS, so to say, to children and youth to navigate this complex ocean of informations. And this is about an integrated approach that we have to put in practice. This is what in the UN, focusing on fighting against hate speech and fake news we are working on. And it's not about a simple dimension, and it's about putting together all the dimensions that education can give, from knowledge to awareness to changing behaviors. I want to focus on one point to give a concrete example of how education can really contribute to rebuild this trust, which is a very missing word and a very missing point in our current environment. It's about the power of language. If you want that children understand, which is the distinction between truth and fake news they find in the very many sources they use to have information and knowledge as well, we must teach them the language, the power of language, and to teach them that words matter. And according to the different kind of words you can use, you can have a kind of very much different behavior and also action in your environment. So I think that this is a very important point. Teachers are part of this integrated approach, and a real very well oriented program of teacher training, which takes into account digital literacy, media literacy, and investing in training of teachers about these topics is what we are doing in the UN system and UNESCO leadership. There is a task force which is working at the global picture, where of course we have very many different situations, but there is a common point that we absolutely realize in this crisis. 65% of teachers worldwide said we are not prepared to move from the traditional classroom to the virtual rooms. That means not be prepared to use technologies as they should be used. Very last point, connectivity and digital divide. I mentioned the Global Education Coalition. It's about a partnership between the traditional main actors in education internationally, the UN agency mostly, but also the private sector. And I think it's time to take a new kind of partnership with the companies, the high-tech companies, which are mostly responsible of providing platforms and connectivity, but on the other side, somehow not to put in practice those tools that must guarantee security, ethics, and protection of data as well. So I think that it's the right time to provoke a positive reaction also, and a new kind of responsibility shared by the private sector as well around the same mission.
Hi, and welcome back. We thought it would be a good time to drop in and tell you a little bit more about our official ceremony and what to expect. So we are expecting heads of states to gather, I hear, behind closed doors. So we will have Angela Merkel, we will have Antonio Guterres, we will have Ursula von der Leyen, President Macron, as well as Kristalina Georgieva, Charles Michel, and Macky Sall, gathering behind closed doors, I hear, to talk about
not only how to get out of this crisis, but also how do we prepare for the post-COVID-19 world. In other words, what they are doing, what they've been doing during lunchtime, and they have a meeting also from 2 to 3, and we will be starting the official ceremony at 2 p.m., and then we will join the Elysee at 3 p.m. after having heard from leaders such as Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi, Giuseppe Conte, Justin Trudeau, and many others. And then we will join them at 3 p.m. And they will tell us to what sort of consensus they have reached in terms of the principles for the post-COVID-19 world. We're not out of the crisis yet, but they will be thinking about what principles should guide us in this post-COVID world.
So I have two questions. One is a technical one, I guess. Tell the people watching, why is it behind closed doors, and why do the attendees not get access to what's happening behind closed doors?
So it's only partially behind closed doors. And the reason is part of the discussion is happening among them, and then they will sort of continue the discussion, not for just a 5-minute account to the media, but to share with everybody on the platform, on the Paris Peace Forum platform, but also on YouTube and Facebook, the results of their discussion. And that will last from 3 to almost 4 p.m. So part of the discussion will be public, actually, and will be made available to all after the part that will be behind closed doors.
So this gets me to my segue, and I think it's important for the people to know that, we're not trying to be secretive. A lot of diplomacy talks, if you're serious about it, must happen behind closed doors, because that's when you really get to negotiate and come to agreed upon outcomes. So, you mentioned Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We do know India suffered a huge crisis when it came to handling migration during COVID, and there was a lot of international outcry about the same. And we do have certain world leaders who are not upholding the spirit of Paris Peace Forum. We have certain world leaders using this crisis as a way to shut down dissent and infringe upon human rights that the global community is raising alarm about, a lot of our partners included. So to those watching and perhaps getting confused as to why are certain world leaders here when they perhaps don't fit the motto of Paris Peace Forum, what do you have to tell them?
The choice we made from the beginning at the Paris Peace Forum was to have everybody around the table, to try and work on such problems as climate, biodiversity, cyber issues, migration, etc. Problems that necessitate having everybody around the table. And it's true that sometimes there needs to be work done with leaders that don't uphold these principles. Mm-hmm. And what we insist on at the Paris Peace Forum is that their contribution to the Paris Peace Forum would be positive and would be productive on the topics that we are asking them to work on, such as climate. For example, Chinese leader Xi Jinping will be not only repeating the announcement that he made during the General Assembly of the UN, but also sort of laying the larger rationale of Chinese policy on climate. What we want is to have them in so as to have a discussion with them and perhaps point their attention to these shortcomings that you mentioned, and perhaps push forward projects, including among the 100 projects we have, that precisely try to push them in the right direction.
Yep, and I think this is also very much the spirit of the United Nations, where you don't exclude member states, but bring them into the foray. And it's a good chance, I think, for us to, again, double down on what are the values of Paris Peace Forum. So regardless of, what is happening outside the doors, when they come here, there are certain agreed upon values and principles. So on that front, we know that 4 of the world leaders will then come and make a public declaration on the agreed upon principles.
Absolutely. So basically what you can expect for this afternoon, starting at 2 p.m. Paris time, is this official ceremony from 2 p.m. to almost 4 p.m. Then, as you know, there will be the second highlight, which is the Summit of Development Banks, starting at 4 p.m. And then at 5:30 p.m., we will have the session on vaccines around Dr. Tedros from WHO, Melinda Gates, President Macron, and others, which will be important and when we will be making announcements.
Perfect. So we have a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely. Stay with us and enjoy the afternoon.